Hi guys, welcome to the channel. My name's Chris Wright. I'm a landscape photographer working out of Granada, Spain. A couple of weeks ago I made a video about Photomator, a application for photo processing made by Pixelmator, and the source of the interest in that was the ongoing acquisition of Pixelmator by Apple, and I think that makes it worth having a look at in some detail. So I've had a look at Pixelmator and I've decided that it's not something that can easily be covered in one video. So I'm going to do a short series. There are probably no more than 3, but that depends largely on what people say, what the comments are like, whether there's an appetite for more videos or less videos even. So let's have a look at Pixelmator. Now, what I covered in the Photomator video, a lot of that stuff was around basic and intermediate edits. So it was around global controls with a little bit of selective editing going on. In this video, I don't want to repeat myself, and most, if not all, of the functionality of Photomator is repeated in Pixelmator, so I'm not going to go too much over the basic controls. We will revisit them just to demonstrate what they're about, but you can always have a look at the Photomator video if you want to catch up on that in more detail. But today we're going to focus on intermediate level edits, and this plays into something that I'm very keen on, certainly, which is the concept of deliberate photography, or photographing with intent, editing with intent. So what we're looking at here is how to get the concept of depth into a landscape photograph. So we're starting with the raw original, which is flat in the sense of both being two-dimensional, but also in the tones and the colours. Like every raw file, it's a work in progress, and the intention of raw files is that the detail is there, the colours are there, the tones are there, and it's how we as photographers want to arrange them. So what this is going to be about is how we get the impression of layers, or how we accentuate the layers that are in the photograph to the viewer to make the photograph more interesting to look at. So without further ado, let's get into it. I want to talk about very quickly, I'm going to revisit the basic adjustments we talked about with the Photomator video, just as a recap and just as to get us up to a point where we're pretty much level pegging with that. And then I'm going to look at selective adjustments, which is really the intermediate stage. It's the stage at which you say to yourself, what do I want to achieve with this picture? So fundamentally, raw file is always quite flat, but there's a lot of information in there. And the basic adjustments are about bringing that to life. And in some cases where you've got a really good exposure, really good well-balanced exposure, nice lighting, that's enough. But in 90% of cases, particularly in landscape photography, it isn't enough. And you want to start making some decisions about which parts of the picture you want to alter. To revisit this, we've got a bright area in the sky here, and that is slightly over bright. So I would immediately go to my highlights and I would bring this down, and that way I can recapture quite a lot of detail in that sky. But the rest of the picture is still very flat. So really we've got a two-dimensional picture here. There's no real differentiation between this hill, that hill, and these hills over here, and the sky. And what we really want to do is to have 4 layers so that the picture becomes more interesting to look at and makes more of an impact on people. So I want to talk about the shadow slider, the brightness slider, the contrast slider, and the Blackpoint slider. And what I'm going to do first of all is to demonstrate their effect using a monochrome color chart. And it should in a moment be very clear why I'm doing it this way. Now, what we've got here are 8 more or less equally spaced spikes, and they represent, surprise, surprise, each one of these 8 slices of color. Now, if I raise the exposure, it's a global exposure, I'm making it brighter, and you can see everything is moving towards the right hand side of the histogram and the left hand side of the picture. So it's moving the mids towards white, and it's even lightening the black a little bit there. Now that much should be obvious, but the more interesting ones are where you start applying a little bit of what I'm calling moderately selective controls. If I go with my highlights and increase my highlights, you can see the same thing happening on the left of the picture, but if you look at the histogram here, there is nothing happening to my darks at all. So beyond probably this color here, this tone here, no difference. So highlights are a great way of reducing, as we just have done, the impact of overly bright skies. Shadows, you would expect to see something similar happening. So we're moving the shadows, we're brightening the shadows, but it's not having any effect on the left-hand side. Darkening the shadows, it's drawing the mids into the black, and you see that both here and here in the histogram. Brightness, a little like contrast, but it's not altering the end point so much. So if you look at the pure white, pure black, you can see it's the middle ones that are all being altered. So that makes brightness quite a powerful one to have in the armory. Contrast, everything out to the extremes, everything into the middle. So contrast, we have to remember, is a global setting. It's going to alter everything in the picture. Blackpoint, move it to the right, and it's pulling the mid into the black. Okay, now the other thing I want to talk about with contrast very briefly is something to be aware of, is this. When I move my contrast slider, it's altering the colours. Yeah, so I increase my contrast, the colours become slightly more pastel. If I decrease the contrast, they become much more vivid and bright. Okay, now this is something you really need to watch out for in colour processing in particular. Now, selective colour here, if we choose yellow, yeah, you can see that hue change being applied only to the yellow. It's not affecting any of the other colours. Saturation, same thing. Brightness is affecting the greens a little bit, but largely the yellow. Okay, so that's the colour chart. If we bring this back across to our original, we'll keep the highlights down because I think looking at the way that they interacted with the color charts, the highlights is as good a way as I've got in this application of altering my extreme whites without actually affecting any of the rest of the picture. Now, this is where we start to run into a little bit of problem, because if I increase my darks, I make it lighter. If I darken my darks, it's still affecting rather too much, rather more of this picture than I would like. And this will vary from picture to picture, but be careful, because it can drag areas in that you don't necessarily want to change. Brightness, this is the one that I said watch out for. It's a great way of introducing some mid-range brightness, or the opposite, into the picture. Now, contrast, as we would expect from what we just saw with the color charts, if I take it out here, it's going to make this problem worse, although it is going to introduce a bit more contrast here. So that's a non-starter. Blackpoint, I can make these darker, but you can see from the line here, I'm losing detail in these black areas here. If I take that the other way, I'm picking that detail up, but it's making the rest of the picture more bland, so that's not really going to do it either. Forget about texture and clarity. We'll come back to texture and clarity in another video. Right. What I want to focus on is selectively altering color and selectively altering the curve and the levels across the whole picture. Now, I'm very fond of using curves to enhance contrast. Now, if I make a point here, and a point here, and a point here, you can see how powerful this slider is. Way too powerful to be treated as casually as I'm treating it here. But what we have is a tool that is capable of selectively altering the values in any area defined by the amount of dark. Now, the graph going on behind it is the amount of pixels, if you like, or the amount of pixel values we've got that are covering any one particular area. So this area here, we could expect to see a great deal of change to the picture. Yeah, and this area here, not so much, because there are very few pixels in that area. So, using the sort of intuition that you have, we can use this tool to apply contrast kind of selectively. And here what I'm doing is just using it to put a little bit of a pop into this area, dropping our darks a little bit because we've got quite a lot of bright sunshine up here, and suddenly we've got some distinct areas in this picture. So we've got an area here, which is a layer, if you like, and an area here that are beginning to look quite separate. We're giving this picture some depth. Now, the other way that I can do this, or the way that I can enhance this, is to use the selective color tool to change some of the hues. So I want to make this hillside much yellower, because it's got these yellow grasses all over it. So we're going to move and change this. That makes it greener, that makes it yellower, make it more saturated, and give it a little bit more brightness there. Okay, so suddenly now we've got a real difference beginning to impact this picture. We've now got a hillside here that looks pretty radically different to this hillside here. Now, before we go off, a quick look at the levels tool, because this is another really powerful tool. So what levels gives you is your white point here. You can see just down there, that is indicating that we've got pure white, i.e. no information at all. That's right up against the right hand side. And down here we've got no areas at all that are completely black. But if I move the slider to the right, what I'm doing is I'm bringing more and more of this picture into the completely black area. So all of this here becomes completely black, and you'd see that reflected up here as well. Now notice these two sliders that appear when I bring my cursor in. This is the midpoint. So what I would be inclined to do here is use these mid sliders just to give us a little bit more contrast. And what I've really achieved with this is to make the whole front of the picture, including this range here, entirely separate from the back. Perhaps overdone it a little bit for the sake of demonstration, so I might just back off slightly on that, but let's take that back towards enhance our greys in there, and keep that to there. And I think that is reasonably effective. Now what we can do is have a look at the before and after. Split comparison. Here we go. I'll move that back to 0. So on the right we've got our developed picture, on the left we've got our raw file. So you can see as we come across, more definition in the sky, more contrast on that hilltop, and this is actually now beginning to look like a sunny day, which is what we wanted. Okay, I think that demonstrates adequately how these tools work. I might, if I was to walk away and come back again to this picture, I might sort of desaturate it ever so slightly. I think these areas here are slightly oversaturated, but I'm into realism, so not everybody is. Some people would prefer it this way. But the tools selection here is very, very powerful. Much more powerful than the sliders are. So use with caution, but enjoy them. And remember that the whole point of this, with landscape photography in particular, is to introduce a feeling of depth into the picture. If you think about how your audience is interacting with this, they're looking from the outside in. So initially, two-dimensional screen, but if I look at it the second time, I can go, yeah, I can see this is a different set of tones than this, another different set of tones again, another different set of tones, and I can see that there's some depth in this picture and somewhere to go with it, and that's the aim of this type of editing. Okay, so next week with Pixelmator, what we're going to have a look at is the masking capabilities in Pixelmator. It looks interesting. There's some good capabilities matching the capabilities of Lightroom in terms of being able to use masks in intersections with additive and subtractive qualities. So we're going to have a good look at that, and I look forward to seeing you then. So don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, down below give us a like. That'd be absolutely fantastic. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe. There'll be lots more videos about photo editing software, as well as trips out into the mountains and the deserts of Andalusia. So we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot. Bye now.